So I have to okay, one of the, like, central tenets of Parinal method is the notion of devotion, which is that you show up with the best of what you have to offer regardless of of a notion of showing up, like, perfectly. And today is a great example of that. I have not been feeling well, but I definitely don't feel great today. So, but I'm showing up, and that's actually part of the creating and building thing, which is that it's not like in earnest and sincerity showing up, when it's like I don't know, I don't know what it actually, whatever. But also there's something that is really also meta about the practice of parinama that's also devotional, which I'm finding that the more momentum builds with my practice, the more time I spend away from developing the consciousness of it or nurturing the consciousness of it or being it. Um like I can like it's just like the quality of my life declines. Like the feeling and my connection to yeah, my connection to myself and yeah, this kind of transcendent nature is like yeah. I mean, partially because there's definitely like a riptide of cultural forces that are kind of continuing to reinforce any adaptations that we have, like anything that's like to be chronically fearful, to feel shameful, to not feel like full of love for yourself, to escape large emotions. um you know like all of that, like that, there's just it's like so the practice, like the devotion of a practice. I'm just talking about my direct experience with it. And also, and also the thing is, I know it's like with like add in a sprinkle of nuance, which is like I actually have been feeling unwell enough that it's like I put myself first as far as being like, no, I need rest. So there's that as well. But it's like, but yeah, so but anyway, so I'm gonna get into it. So here we are. It's been kind of a minute since I've jumped on a live with this, and we're talking about creating and building things. And I might do a little kind of walkthrough about what this is. Sometimes I feel like it, sometimes I don't. But like just as a reminder, like we ascend through the hubs in terms of the process of actualization to really like clear out as much as we can, at least in a first cycle of the process of our adaptations, like our relationships with fear, our relationships are like mistaking of ourselves as being like faulty or embarrassing or whatever, like all this stuff where it's like where we're like expanding our capacity, and really like ultimately getting on our side. Like so it's like our default is to be looking for solutions as we understand that if something doesn't work for us, it just means that we need to try another way versus it being like validation, like if one approach isn't right, of some narrative of like being flawed or like, see, I can't do it. It's like, no, I know it, to know yourself, to know that it's like the inherent sort of extraordinariness of yourself, to be connected enough with that to be like, yeah, it's just I need to either find a way or there's probably something else I'm supposed to be doing, but to just be on your side in that way, not to be like defeated um by like false senses or adapted senses of who and what you are. So we do that in terms of the ascending pathway, like one, and we're following the chronological development of a nervous system as a framework. It's not, it's like there's of course exceptions and but, like, following it as a notional framework in terms of the building blocks of what our lived experience is and how it's built and how it gets interrupted and distorted and distressed, and that we build adaptations to survive around that. Then we have this chapter. It's one chapter, and I'm finding it to be, personally very disruptive, and it's giving me a lot of empathy for what people are telling me like, their experience of the book, because it's giving me the very core disruptiveness of Parinama. Like, I'm really feeling it. Um, yeah, because some of the other stuff is very like, kind of, like, more worked through for me, I guess I'd say. Like, more massaged through, sanded down, whatever you wanna call it. But this is, like, I'm finding that this is actually, like, really I'm getting very, like, activated by this. Yeah. So, the stages of this, it's, like, so in reverse. So when we're doing the ascending, we're dealing with, like, our sense of physical security, which is, like, infant, dealing with feeling and emotion and desire and, like, that's with a baby. Then will and individuality of toddler, and then sort of like love and connection and socialization with a young child. And then we're looking at, beginning to a self-expression, which is sort of is like a child that's in, sort of like late grade school or like middle school. And then as we ascend into self-expression and vision and know, like, and then up into knowing, which is like into late adolescence, early adulthood. And now what we're doing is like, that's kind of like there's this kind of expansion in that. And then what we're doing here is that we're actually going backwards to actually like bring things into the world. Like, so it's taking something from its most like sort of like, from the cosmos, so to speak, and then densifying it into something that can actually be a shared experience in the, physical world. And a lot of that shared experience has to do with it is about other people. And this is one of the things where, I'm really interested in the cultural zeitgeist around manifestation, especially right now, and how it's kind of like in popular culture, it's kind of like you've got these pieces that are like actually very almost like gendered, which is like this idea that of manifestation being like really about dreaming and expansiveness and like exp- you know and And just, like, kind of the idea that it's like if you change your mindset, everything will happen for you sort of passively. And then there's kind of another school of thought, which is, like, really all about action. Really, like, without a lot about, like, inspiration, without a lot about, like, creativity. It's just more about execution. And the thing is they're both absolutely, like, you put them together, it's kinda like the 1980s, and this was even before my time, I didn't see this commercial, but it was alluded to a lot, is like the Reese's peanut butter cup where, like, the chocolate and the peanut butter come colliding and they make like, it's just they both actually need to exist together, and it's kind of the magic of bringing 2 complementary opposites together, and also it's like the upper hub, lower hub. It's it's activating kind of like this, like, synergy of these 2 qualities to bring something into the world. And one of the things is that the lower execution hub is like technically the easier to access, and you're closer to the ground and closer to actually bringing something into reality. So even you see a lot in terms of like creation, a lot of folks that are effectively creating or taking ideas that are not necessarily theirs, and then they're, like, executing them, and, so that's, like, a thing, that's, like, the place that you can, like, see that happening, and then you have people who are really great at the creation part of accessing the ideas that actually aren't executing. So that's where, like, where you have a split here. But so when we're doing the reverse order, we're starting in the seventh hub with inquiry. So this is a concrete methodology. This is not like sit around and just like, draw your visions and all this kind of stuff. This is literally like how you do it. And one of the reasons that it's like, I mean, it's hard. It's hard. I mean, that's the barrier of entry. The barrier of entry is that the temptation for creating and manifesting is that people will tend to go towards something that makes sense for who they already are. So it's like, Atomic Habits, like people wanting to do like really execution-based bestseller stuff will be like, that makes sense to me. And if that makes sense to you, it's already something that you have like some level of like proficiency with. And then if it's like, like kind of more like in the secret and even like one of the things that was like untamed and things like without methodology, which is just sort of like about expanding your perspective. That's something that for folks that are really like naturally inclined for that are going to lean towards that. And that's something else with Parinama. That's one of the, like when it first came out and I was like, yeah, just kind of go where you want to go. And now I understand that that's actually like not it. Like it is chronological and you should, and I wrote it all over the place, like because like my own capacities in given hubs were getting blown out. So I'd have to move to other hubs just to keep moving. Because I'd get like blown out and overwhelmed as I was working in one. So I'd go and like I'd work in another. And so when I was advising people about like how to read the book, I was like, start Choose Your Own Adventure. But now that I've read it cover to cover and I see the transmutation, the effect of actual like that happens when it's done like when it's followed is like it's most of the places that are going to really change your life are the place that the cave that you fear is the one blah blah blah, but it's like the most of the stuff that is actually going to really provide significant transformation and like the biggest change is the stuff that is like not the comfortable stuff, is not the places where you're like, that's the stuff that I want to spend a lot of time in. I mean, for me, it was second hub. It was about emotional capacity. And it was like, oof, why would I invest in that? Even safety, first hub. First hub was like, that blew my mind, which is like the whole thing about being able to feel physically safe. And I want to emphasize, it's not about necessarily the creation of physical safety. It's becoming aware that being able to feel safe. Like, can you feel safe? Can you feel at rest? Can you feel completely secure? Like in a moment where there's nothing threatening you. Are you going to like find something to worry about? Like, yeah, well, I paid I paid rent this month, but what about next month, right? And even like, what if I lose my job? What if like, and just like the cycling of just this kind of embodied hypervigilance that is like sewn into us. Like, I mean, I get into these discussions with Parinama practitioners who are both extraordinarily wealthy and folks who are like, arguably in poverty, like, yeah, not even arguably, like by definition, um, not spiritually impoverished, but like physically, like really struggling with money. And there's this kind of like in the first hub, there's a very similar thing, which is like, and it's kind of like, it's like, yeah, because there's, because it's like a thing. So anyway, so it's like, it's not, can I get myself to a place where I am safe? It's like, do I know how to feel safe? Do I know how to, and in the book, fourth chapter, techniques and exercises, nervous system regulation helps, grounding, all of the tools in here. But one of the things is bringing consciousness to it, bringing consciousness to yourself, bringing consciousness to your extraordinariness, bringing consciousness to your mortality, bringing consciousness to your ability to solve problems, to bringing consciousness to the fact that things are out of your control, being conscious that life is inherently not just like safe for anything, for anyone. There's no one who is safe. I mean, one of the things that with some extraordinary wealthy people is they become fixated on physical safety in a way where they're trying to create it to exist in a way that is supernatural, and it's like, and the fixation on it is an adaptation where you have a hyper fixation on like safety, like insurance, security, health, youthfulness, like whatever. And the idea, I think people like standing outside sort of the like castle walls are going, "Oh wow, they're really safe in there." And it's like, well, they're kind of, I guess, sort of safe from you, but like not really. Oh, I love this book. I really love this book. I really love it for the framework that it offers as far as being able to, from just even in my own practice, but even just with supporting people and working with people to make things really clear. Because right now, there's kind of, like there's a lot of, okay, well, so there's a lot of like people who are consuming enormous amounts of what I call like secondary content, which is someone else consumed, sort of like had direct experiences with things, consume, so Parinama would be like a secondary content. My process of creating is primary. Of everything I read, everything I like put together, like the thinking, my own experience with it. And it's designed to actually, it's intended to be able to create a primary experience for the practitioner, for the reader, for you to connect in with your own direct experience with yourself and these notions. But yeah, I mean, it's the importance of being able to connect with yourself is you need to be able to trust yourself. And that distrust is, it's a huge part of what we're building on here throughout this process, is to like regain that trust, regain that relationship with yourself, reunify yourself so that you can feel things and know what they are. You can feel, it's like I can feel when something is foreign. I can feel when something is not my idea. I can feel when something is like like I'd almost call it a contaminant at this point. It doesn't make it the feeling any less, but it creates a certain level of clarity. Yeah. So whatever. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit. So just to go back, it's like we start in this process. 7th hub, inquiry, receptivity, and then dealing with limiting beliefs. 6th hub, we start to crystallize the vision by staying with it and looking at it and continuing to ask questions, and also understand who we are and understand ourselves as it relates to what we're creating, finding our story as it connects with what we're creating. Then in the 5th hub, it's about finding the words. Then in the 6th hub, it's about the finding the words is like helping us be able to enroll people and start to connect with people, figure out who we work with, figure out who's going to work with us. And then 3rd hub is about execution. And then now we're talking about the 2nd hub, which is another place where it's kind of links up with the 5th hub, which is another place where people tend to want to kind of like skip the work because it has to do with the really important aspect of connecting with people. That is what creating what manifestation is about. So what you build and create needs to evoke feelings and emotions in the people you would intend to affect. Moving people is about connecting with them through feeling and being emotionally evocative. Marketing expert Seth Godin writes on his blog that we like to quote, like to think we make complicated decisions based on rational analysis, but most of the time we actually make an emotional decision and then invent a rational analysis to justify it. If our goal is to help people make better choices, it helps to first create better feelings. Yeesh. I mean, so I don't wanna go too far afield in this right now, but, emotional literacy and emotional capacity right now, we're seeing what happens when you have a population that doesn't understand what their emotions are and the strength of them and their capacity to overwhelm is just completely just it's floods and hijacks so that, like and even the mistaking of emotion for knowing. Like, if you haven't I'm just gonna say, without and this is why this is a framework is so helpful, without in terms of, like, looking at each of these components individually, that, if we don't understand feeling and even, like, thinking, and that this very notion, the Seth Godin, then our feelings, which are really largely unconscious and subconscious, start to rationalize whatever thoughts are sort of floating in front of us, and we start to make sense of the world in a way that can be really dangerous. That's all I'll say on that. But anyway, it has nothing to do with creating and building necessarily. Well, it does and it doesn't. So anyway, the creative process is a journey of self-development and personal transformation that involves building things that support people in ways that matter to them. Building and creation are at their best when they're responsive and iterative, just like the attunement in the early development of the second hub. An important part of the process is finding how to create emotional connection through taking something that makes sense to you into a relatively small group of people and testing its resonance with increasingly larger groups. This presents a paradox: maintaining your integrity while being aware of what people want and need from you. Oof. Um, ugh. Yeah. A stumbling block at this stage can be receiving a bad reaction without knowing how to keep the response in perspective and how to learn from it. I'm going to point this out. This is actually like a really classic Parinamaism here for me, which is that like I can read this and it like continues to elevate, like it continues to evolve in front of my own eyes, where it's like there's just stuff in here where I'm like, the maintaining your integrity while being aware of what people want and need from you. This is for I'll say for my own process, and I imagine for yours, for anyone's, is like this has been like a real logjam for me. Yeah, as it relates to me wanting to, like yeah, yeah, I'm actually not gonna get into that right now. But yeah, if you want me to, just ask. As you can tell, I think. I've noticed a tendency across most technology company founders I've consulted with. They're attached to their original vision and have a hard time balancing it with feedback from customers and employees. They struggle to respond to the priorities of their prospective customers, who signal the direction of the overall market, while prioritizing a specific version from their early inspiration that holds meaning for them. It's easy to understand how and why this happens, considering the delicate nature of the sixth hub descending phase and how much work it takes to get to the second hub. Projects may begin as inspiration that emerge from facing a personal challenge, but sometimes that specific experience is not relatable to the larger market. Hence, we need to be responsive and willing to incorporate other points of view. Yeah, that's kind of like granted, that's kind of a mouthful, and normally when I'm reading, it's like 1 or 2 sort of things will pop up in my head. Couldn't see that I'm not feeling great. I'm getting a little svitzy. But, like, as I'm reading this, like, numerous examples are coming to mind here, and, um and so, one of them being, like, I worked with a company, and the CEO had such a second hub issue in terms of being, like, overly emotionally responsive that I would get calls, like, just boop, I'd be, like, doing something, like, somewhere I was working as a consultant, so and they would just be panicked. They'd say, "I ran into somebody in the hall and they said this." And I'd be like, "Okay." It's okay. It's okay, people get uncomfortable with, like, changing things. You gotta just kinda stay the course. She'd be like, "Well, should we change it back?" I was like, "Yeah, the other way doesn't work." They're comfortable with that way, um, because they're comfortable with it, but our job and what we're doing is to steer the group to be ultimately successful. Like, we have her job, his job, their job for leaders is that it's like ultimately, theoretically, that the idea is that your duty of care is for the greater good, and it's not uncommon that, like, to change things is uncomfortable for people, and there are people that don't like it. And, there's and so in this particular example that comes to mind, I think about the fact that it's like, I think that's a really good quality to care, but you don't need to care in a way that's responsive to the overall mission. It's like caring in terms of being like taking the time to explain to the person and be like, here's what we're thinking, what do you do? How do you feel about like sort of giving this a shot with us? Like, and explain it to them. Like give them the respect of giving the context if you haven't. But and there's other examples here. That there was a company that I was brought into where it was like this really like super wealthy founder. There's so many examples of this thing about people having their idea and not wanting to change it, like their idea of what they're doing. And when it's like it makes sense to them and that passion, understandably, like drove a lot of the energy that got them to the place that they're at, which is like super admirable. So that's why this stage is just so challenging because it's like to be, one of the things about the second hub is like flexibility and malleability and being able to shift and change and nuance and like be able to like move. And for when there's like sort of rigidity that's been created, and it was like this super, it's like I can't tell too many details without revealing it because it's so, but it was like a super wealthy person who had an issue with a real estate transaction that was, like, so unrelatable to, like, the general population in terms of even like, there are 2 issues with it. One wa yeah, there I can't tell, it's like, I wish I could give the example of it. Yeah, the more I can't say anymore. Okay, let's see. So founders and executives can have trouble knowing when their emotions are hijacking their decision-making processes. In some cases, big decisions can be made for a company based on one piece of particularly charged feedback received, while founders felt especially vulnerable. I would receive their calls throughout the day about having heard something from staff, and before the founders could even process and contextualize it, they were frantically looking to make changes. Some struggled with emotional regulation to the point that their staff was exhausted and facing burnout from weathering the ups and downs and the lack of a clear, consistent plan. That's exactly it, actually. When leaders don't get the support of therapy, the people around them can wind up being pulled into the role. Yeah. So here, okay. Yeah, that's one thing I'll say that's kind of like a very practical, like, sort of outcropping of this thing of having the example that I'm giving of, like, this in this particular case that is actually alluded to here as well, is getting calls kind of around the clock from an executive who's like, "Well, somebody said this, somebody said that," and the person who's saying it to them is also, it's kind of like any type of leadership, even as as in parenting, is that, like, a child may be like, "This is the thing I want," but, like, the context of being able to be like, "Look, I have your greater good in mind." Like, that's the whole thing, and so, God, it's like I hate using parenting as an example because 'cause I'm not a parent, but, but, like, the thing is in this particular company, the people that worked in it, they like, the CEO had given, like, a ton of access. So, it was, like, open door policy, but they didn't have the kind of the strength of vision to not be deeply impacted by, like, every emotionally charged or, like, feeling all the feelings that were coming their way. And then what was happening is, like, certainly before I got involved, changes were made all the time. So you look at it like one person says, I really, I just talked with a customer and they said this." And the CEO goes, "Oh my God, we need to make these changes." So all these changes would be put into play or like would be put in motion. And then somebody else would come and say, "Yeah, I just was talking to so and so and they said this is too hard for them to go." Oh my God. So, the people that worked in the company were just getting exhausted by the fact that there just wasn't a clear line of sight about how to proceed. So that's another part of it, is that, like, being able to have, like, your own emotional literacy, and the last part here is when leaders don't get the supportive therapy, the people around them can wind up being pulled into the role. I've done that. I've been that person. I've had, like, lieutenants who work for me, like, wind up being, like, de facto therapists, which is, like, really inappropriate, and it doesn't end well. It doesn't end well because and I'll say this in the first person, is that while someone who is, like, offering a role of confidence to you, I'm gonna say this in the first person, which is, like, tough. It's tough. This is a tough one to say, but there's this sense of ownership that the person who like, whoever your, like, director or whoever it is that's, like, being your kind of, like, second in command that, like, talks you through everything and, bigs you up and stuff, and, when I was, like, earlier in my career, that it was kind of like that it's kind of like emotional labor, and this is, like, sort of a reverse thing because the examples I have of this are men, but, like, the emotional labor, it has, this very second hub has sort of this thing where it, like, kind of doesn't get clocked, and then there's a tremendous amount of energy expenditure that, people in this role would be putting in, and that kind of would go unrecognized, and that the, outcomes of it, the positive outcomes would be all sort of, recognized by, like, in my performance and the things that I did. So, there's that. So, yeah. So, emotional illiteracy is epidemic, especially for people who ignore their feelings and emotions to make Third Hub super productivity possible. There are times we need to do punishing hours of work and to push ourselves, but doing this too much leads to burnout. And so, it's not a long term strategy. It's essential to not let go of the string holding the kite because you'll eventually need to pull back joy, rest, and nourishment. The pleasure and restoration from the second hub make a venture sustainable. Yeah, I don't know if that reads really clean, but the bottom line is that, and this has been certainly, this is not, this has been, studied, and certainly, yeah, and, documented by like studies in large institutions, which is that, um, like the notion of self-control, like the idea that it's like you're using willpower to subdue desire in order to be able to keep choosing doing directive action is actually, not an accurate depiction of what's happening, which is like what's happening is the desires are actually getting subdued themselves. So, like, they're get like, the desire for fun, the desire for, like, free like, rest, joy, nourishment, like, all of these things just get kind of, like, repackaged and pushed down. So, very common outcome of this is that people who've worked very hard to accomplish things wind up not knowing what to do with the fruits of their labor. They come out and they're just like they're emotionally like sort of like, I don't know what to do for fun. Do I build another company? Do I do more work? Do I do more work? It's people who are like, I can't rest, I can't, I go on vacation, they pull out their laptop like that. And for people who, have worked for me, that's been something that's been really important to me, which is like, you're actually not allowed to work because the damage that's done by uninterrupted like hyperfixation on your work is that it actually impacts this capacity to feel alive and to be able to connect with the things that are pleasurable and enjoyable in the sweetest simple ways. Because then you have hedonism. So another side of this is like hedonism. You'd be like, oh yeah, I know plenty of people that work hard and they really enjoy themselves. But it's this weird, like really like brash, like numb, like overconsumption of shit that is like super dehumanized. So I'm talking about is being able to like feel the like sun on your skin still and like be able to feel like this simple pleasures of just feeling like joy and liking things and connecting with people. And um so like yeah, there's that. At this stage of building, it's good to know your emotional needs and to be able to ask for help. This knowledge will help determine the project's sustainability and will be a key predictor of your long term success. Hyper-independence is an adaptation. The process of conscious creation gets disruptive as it transforms. Say, like, run that back. Like, that is a fact. The process of conscious creation gets disruptive as it transforms, and you'll need emotional support to counter the sacrifice, the challenge, and the changes that will come. If the project you're working on will change your life, you are in it for a long haul, and the grinding of the third hub will eventually lead to burnout if it isn't countered with the release and enjoyment of at least some second hub self gratification. For people with a tremendous drive that got them this far, this hub will be an enormous challenge, especially if there's perfectionism that still needs to be subdued. Interesting word there. So get yourself the good chair, invest in ergonomics for your workspace, play, pet your cat, take a walk, exercise, make time for your pranayama practice, and get a massage. As the captain, you are essential to the actualization of this project, which will only be sustainable if you take care of yourself. Yeah. Yeah, and this is something too, which is, going back to the second and the third hub chapters, chapter 5 and 6, which is that if the development of the second hub, if and it's like it's not uncommon. If this is why the development of doing the ascending path is so important, is that like, sometimes it's just like it's the capacity doesn't exist yet. It can. Takes work, it's hard, it's uncomfortable, stretching past, like, the size of something, so it's like breaking through. It's like molting. Um, that being it's why you have a lot of people who come from very, like, stressed, um, like, formative years who end up being really good workers because the importance of, like, feeling like, it's harder to feel the fact that you're being, like, that like, it's you're just disconnected from the fact that it doesn't feel good to, like, work 100 hours a week, you know? Like, you can sustain that if you're really detached from that. Very common in high performance, and it's interesting too because 'cause I'm seeing a lot of this, I think it's to do with my age, which is, like, people who are, like, of my age who have had who've been successful enough that now they're sort of, like, in their, second this new act of their career, and they don't really know how to do anything except try to do it again, and they know that they can't. You know that they can't for reasons I won't get into here, just because the grind of it. But anyway, so my sore throat is catching up with me. So the next sections here are the practical exercises, or these are sort of practical, but make it fun and celebrate your wins. I would also say that for this chapter 5 is really key, just to revisit it. If any of this feels like, what are you talking about? To revisit chapter 5. It's really normal that people are like, "Why would this be part of anything that has to do with, like, practical?" Like, 'cause the way people feel around you, going back to the Seth Godin quote, it's like the thing that people, like, create some kind of rationalization, but, like, how people feel around you, and you can't control that. Like, there's no, there's not like, you can't control it, but, but just being aware that how the things you do make people feel. And also, I would say that the more that you come into your integrity, the thing about, like, either like, how you make people feel, like, the idea of taking, like, this kind of, like this is actually probably too nuanced to get into here as I'm wrapping up. But there's, like, a natural magnetism to being self-contained in terms of, like, holding being self-sustained, like, having your own sense of self, like, loving yourself, and so it's like, yeah, I'm not gonna get into that here. It's too much for today. Okay, so if you're following along, that was page 309, and also look in chapter 5. And so next, make it fun, celebrate your wins, and then we do the first hub descending, and that's it for this chapter. And what comes next, who knows? All right, I'll see you on the other side. Thank you for coming along, and I appreciate you. Bye for now.